Hello, everyone. My name is Deepa Majumdar, and I'm a professor of philosophy at Purdue University Northwest. Let me begin with a disclaimer that anything I say today or in the next clip, these are my own views. They do not represent the university I work for. So let me begin by introducing my topic. I'm going to be speaking of the tragedy of abortion, and I'll be speaking in two parts. Today will be part one, and the next time will be part two. In part one, I'll be speaking of what lies in the background of abortion. And I divide that background into three categories: motherhood, the language of rights, which in my view should come with responsibilities, and the whole heterosexual act and sexual responsibility and ethical forms of sexuality. So these three are the three topics I'll be speaking about today. And in the next clip, I'll be speaking about abortion. So let me begin by saying that, I do think of abortion as a huge tragedy and really something very abhorrent. But at the same time, under some circumstances, it becomes a necessary evil that is also a type of a moral dilemma. And I actually associate two moral dilemmas with abortion. But let me begin with motherhood. So by motherhood, motherhood can range from the biological act of giving birth and then nourishing the infant, from all the way from that to, some motherhood begins there, but it doesn't end there. Mothers are our first teachers. It's on the mother's lap that we learn good from evil. Mothers teach us wisdom. They teach us ethics. The gratitude towards one's mother should be endless, because she undergoes labor pain, risks to her life to bring us into the world, and she raises us and sacrifices her body to bring us into this world, and then raises us. And there's the sacrifices of a mother are kind of endless. And then motherhood continues later in life to sometimes all the way to old age. That doesn't mean you continue sitting on the lap of your mother, but the point is that the mom is the one who will be with you. It's the almost the highest kind of friendship one can find in life. And so I have this whole idea of the cosmic principle of motherhood. I do think of motherhood as a cosmic principle, and it's a cosmic principle that manifests itself biologically, through actual biological motherhood, but it also expresses itself spiritually as what's sometimes called spiritual motherhood, but really should not be called. I don't think gender should be ascribed to it, because it's the level of compassion and the level of empathy which human beings can reach once they transcend their bodies, because gender applies only to the body, and we are much more than our bodies. And once we overcome the bodily stature and we rise ethically, spiritually to the level of compassion and empathy, we then experience that which, a grain of which at least, is there in biological motherhood, which is this feeling of deep self-sacrifice, unselfishness, and empathy for another being, and all beings, actually. So motherhood ranges within human life, from the biological level of sacrifice to the attachment that the mother has towards her children, and the service and the sense of obligation and duty that she has towards her children, ranges all the way from that level to spiritual parenting, which is both of which, that whole range kind of reflects the cosmic principle of motherhood. So why do I glorify motherhood like this? Because I do think that motherhood infuses into what is otherwise the realm of blind matter and nature, a hostile realm. I think of nature as a slaughter bench, just like history is a slaughter bench. And nature is filled with hostility, antipathy, enmity, you name it. Unless one romanticizes nature, that's the reality of nature. And biological processes in this realm of nature are usually blind, morally blind. They just happen. In that sense, they're mechanical without being machines. But motherhood infuses unselfishness, not just in the human mother, but into the very biological process itself. The whole thing of pregnancy, for example, even the biology of it all, the umbilical cord sort of represents unselfishness and love in the sense that it carries oxygen and nutrients from the mother's body into the fetus. So motherhood infuses, this cosmic principle of motherhood infuses unselfishness into blind matter and bodily processes, thus redeeming nature and matter. So motherhood, I think, is really glorious. And I can think of two signs of why it's glorious. One is that even in the realm of animals, and I do say even because I do believe in the great chain of being. I do believe that humans are at the helm of the great chain of being, which should make them much more responsible. They are stewards for the rest of the world, for other creatures on that great chain of being. And so humans rule rule is the wrong word. Humans lead at the helm of the great chain of being. And animals we may love animals and sentimentalize, but that doesn't make them equal to us. Animals are not morally culpable. We don't take them to court when they kill each other, but human beings are morally culpable. So there's a difference between humans and animals. But even in the world of animals, who are otherwise creatures of passion, you find this glory of motherhood. So it's a cosmic principle that affects sentient beings, not just human beings, but the world of animals and birds as well. And then that's one sign that motherhood, that motherhood is a cosmic principle. The other sign is that despite labor pain, the risks to their lives, and despite the relative neglect of motherhood in our times by not just patriarchy, but by feminism as well, lower forms of feminism as well, young women, I know I'm generalizing, and I don't call it an instinct, but young women do long to have children. That young women long to have children despite all the odds against them, to me, is a proof that motherhood is a cosmic principle. And so I do think of motherhood as something great. I also think that women have unselfish bodies because they have bodies that can biologically give birth and at the same time also breastfeed and nourish young children. So women have these really, in that sense, enviable bodies because they're biologically unselfish. Even the worst of mothers does an unintended unselfish act in giving birth and nourishing her child. So that's as far as motherhood is concerned. Now, does that mean that all biological mothers are great? Absolutely not. There are mothers and there are mothers. Okay, some mothers are morally wonderful. Some mothers are truly questionable and cruel. So mothers range in their moral abilities. Plus, there's a whole range of situations, empirical situations of motherhood. So, for example, the most ideal case is that of a mother who's well protected in a home with a partner that she can rely on and gives birth under ideal circumstances to a child that is completely wanted and welcomed. But that's not always the case. We all know that. The worst situation is that of a rape survivor who conceives through rape and understandably feels repugnance for the fetus and wants an abortion. So that's a very tragic situation. I've often wished that, or I wish that biology had been, that nature had seen to it that if only there were a biological way for the system of a woman to shut down and not conceive when attacked and when raped. I wish biology had taken care of it, because rape is drastic and horrific enough. But imagine after that conceiving a fetus whose body, not the soul, but the body of the fetus has been derived partly from the rapist. And that is, I can't even begin to imagine what that would feel like. So the actual situation of motherhood varies tremendously. And then in between, of course, you have all kinds of scenarios of motherhood, but so that's all I really want to say about motherhood. I'd like to move on now to the whole language of rights. We are living in times when we speak a lot about rights. And the realm of rights presupposes a realm of hostility, alienation, and mistrust. which is why we need rights to protect ourselves and to see to it that there is at least a semblance of justice. And so that's what rights are about. And so for example, in a deep friendship, rights become redundant because friendship is about more than rights. And you need, in a friendship, what you can actually make claims on each other. You can actually make demands of each other safely because you have this bond, you have this trust. Likewise, the mother-child bond, when it is strong, the rights are redundant there. A baby can yell and scream and make demands of its mother because it doesn't need to be safeguarded by rights. Now, rights become relevant even in the mother-child relationship when it's a case of abuse. Okay, then of course children need to have rights to protect themselves, to protect them, and so on and so forth. Okay, but rights presuppose hostility, alienation, and I wouldn't say enmity, but at least hostility and alienation. But the other side of rights is that while they protect us from injustice, rights can make us very selfish. Always to demand one's rights can be, and that's why modern man is so self-centered, narcissistic and self-centered, because he speaks in the language of rights. But that's not the only reason. It's because he speaks in the language of rights without responsibilities. Once you attach responsibilities, the cohort of responsibilities that matches each right, then the language of rights need not make us selfish. So, for example, the right to one's body comes with enormous responsibilities. It comes with the responsibility of not using our bodies in ways that harm ourselves or others. It's limited by the rights of other people's bodies. So no rights are unlimited, and rights should come accompanied by responsibilities. So this is a brief sort of background for not just the abortion issue, but for that which abortion presupposes, which is the heterosexual act. So let me begin by saying nobody can have a right to sexual gratification. I mean, sexual gratification, because it can degenerate to lust. I do think the act of sexuality can vary from the very lustful to something that is quite self-controlled and chaste. But the point is that because the sexual act is imbued with lust, that's an appetite. You can't have a right to an appetite, just like you can't have a right to gluttony. The appetites are things to control. And if anything, one has to exert self-control. But there are two rights I can think of that go with the heterosexual act or sexual act at all. One is the right to decide voluntarily as a sovereign being whether or not to even engage in this act. That has to be the individual's decision. Number two, I think we have the right to not be controlled, that is either coerced or thwarted, in expressions of sexuality that are ethical and non-criminal by anything, any outside body, whether a community, a government, or the individuals outside of ourselves. We also have the right, since we're speaking of sexuality, we also have the right to not be controlled in our reproductive activities. No government should be telling a couple how many children they may or may not have. Nor should any government prevent a couple from having children if they want children. So rights to our bodies are limited, but we do have some rights. And when it comes to sexuality, the heterosexual act, interestingly enough, the responsibilities that go with it are not associated with the rights. They are separate from the rights. The two rights I mentioned, the right to decide whether or not to engage in this act and the right to not be controlled by anyone in ethical expressions of the sexual act. So what are the responsibilities, dissociated responsibilities? Number one, we have the paramount responsibility of being respectful towards, during the sexual act, of being respectful in our touch of the other person, of the beloved, of ensconcing the sexual act within a relationship of abiding love, respect, and responsibility towards the other person. I have a huge problem with the word consent. It's a legalistic term because I think it reveals how far we have fallen in our ethical standards, because consent is used for or should be, I mean, it reminds me of property rights, you know. Consent is the wrong term for the sexual act. The right terms for the sexual act should be love, respect, and friendship. And consent already reeks of alienation. It sort of presupposes a sexual act in a vacuum where there's no human relationship there between the sexual partners. So that's the first responsibility we have, of making sure that the sexual act we engage in is ensconced within a relationship of abiding love, friendship, and responsibility towards the beloved, towards the other person. Second, I think we have the responsibility, and notice how these responsibilities are not associated with the rights. Okay, they are independent responsibilities. We have paramount, maybe this is, and this is true of I don't know that it's more true of one gender above the other. In the heterosexual act, I'm speaking of the heterosexual act now, the first responsibility is the sexual act as such, and the second responsibility is the heterosexual act. We have the paramount responsibility of making sure, despite the birth control pill and despite all kinds of measures of birth control, other measures of birth control, that should a fetus come into being as a result of the heterosexual act, we have enormous responsibility towards that fetus. And this is something that any ethical adult should be considering before even getting into this act. And to get into this act and then, succumb to the pleasure principle and then go for an abortion of convenience because the fetus gets in the way of life, degrades both the sexual act and the act of abortion. No fetus asks to come into the womb, and it's a very helpless being, and one has to think about its condition. So I think the responsibility towards the would-be fetus is of paramount importance. I don't think abortion should be taken lightly at all. So this is not to support the harsh anti-abortion measures that are out there. I'm not for those at all. My position is usually neither pro-life nor pro-choice, but taking the good of both and transcending both. But that's another story. That's for the next chapter. So I'm going to end here, and I hope you have. I mean, this is such a sad topic. I can't imagine anyone enjoying listening to anything I have to say. But I hope it helps in any way. If it helps in any way, even the smallest way, I am very grateful then. So thank you so much for listening, and I will have a second part to this. There's a sequel to this. Thank you again.